Moving on along this toolbar, I love this next menu because I like color coding things. Now that's your colorize menu. And these are the default colors that you have, but you can go set your project color setup to have more colors. So I like to set it up to 24 colors because then I have even more color options here. But here you have to be careful what you've got selected. Now, if you have a specific clip selected, if you go to the colorize menu, it makes that clip that color. So that one is now orange, and let's unmute this guy. You'll see that is still gray. So you can do multiple selections. So let's undo that. Now everything's gray again. Now I can also select a track and say, okay, make both the track and everything on that track a certain color. Now, a funny quirk here is if you have something selected somewhere, even if you change the tracks, that clip is still selected. So I now go to my second audio track here. I want to make this guy green. I go to this menu, I make it green. It didn't go green because that clip has gone green. So when you want to colorize tracks, make sure you deselect any clips first, then you choose your track, then you can make it a color. And color coding is very useful for different categories in any DAW to know what sort of audio you want. And I also use it for further things. So say I find this word is problematic, I need to go fix this later or do something with it, I will mark it for myself by say making it pink or red, so I can quickly see on my timeline, there's something I still need to pay attention to. This reminds me of something. Do you notice that squiggle there on the clip? That means we've time stretched that. So you can see quickly that you've altered the time of a clip when you've done that. You'll see if I move this clip, that doesn't have the squiggle, that's in our original time. Next up, we have some snap options. Now, I have a tooltip if you mouse over to see what it means. This one over here, that means things snap to zero crossings. Now that's quite useful when you do fades and you set a clip's endpoint. With that enabled, and for this I really have to zoom in quite a lot, but you'll see it's not actually trimming the clip smoothly. It snaps to every single next zero crossing. Any point where my waveform crosses the zero line from positive to negative amplitude. Now it does that because if you cut at 0 points, then you are less likely to get a click at the end of this. So if I do a manual cut here and I have this disabled, I cut right there in the middle of a waveform. Don't know if this is going to click, but let's see. To zoomed in is now not that bad, but you'll see on some sounds, if you cut right there, the speaker's busy there and then it needs to jump back. So it gives you an audible click. So if you've got that 0 point crossing enabled, it'll look very smooth if you zoomed out like this. It won't look like you're doing any kind of snapping, but it's actually automatically snapping to those points to prevent those pops and clicks. So generally I leave this on for dialogue editing, and the same applies when you do stuff like crossfades. It will make them at those 0 points. Also if you're cutting. So if I zoom in again and I'm in my cutting tool here, it will actually cut that at that 0 point crossing, even if you don't see that. And if I can get my cutting line to appear again, you'll see it actually snaps from 0 crossing point to 0 crossing point. So that one is usually enabled by default. What is not enabled by default is your normal snap to grid or your snap option, like the little magnetic icon in Reaper or something similar in Pro Tools. So with that on, I've got various things that can be snapped to. Now with snap on and off, you have to say what it snaps to. So when it's to the grid, a grid of seconds, it's quite arbitrary of what it snaps to. But if you're working in music, if it's bars and beats, you want it to snap to various bars and beats. So now it's set to bar. So now I have to go one bar at a time that it snaps to, or I can say, no, not quantize, beat, and now it snaps to each beat of the bar. Now this is not a musical timeline here, so that doesn't make sense. So let's go back to timecode mode. So snap to grid, I can't say that I really use it ever for post-production work. That's not kind of click track type music work. But what I do use is the snap to cursor or snap to event. So if I am busy with a video project, which we'll look at later, and I get my playback line just at the right place, and I want something to snap to that place, if I have snap to cursor and I grab my event, it's going to elastically, magnetically snap to that cursor. Similarly, if you've got snap to events, I want to align multiple things. So I want this track clip to start where this clip starts. You have that quite often. Then snap to events is quite useful. Now there's more options. You can have events and cursor, or grid events and cursor, and it does that in that order of priority, which can also be quite useful. So that's the snap option. Can't say I use it that much in post-production work, but I do use it from time to time, especially when I'm positioning things to other events and snapping to the cursor. You also then get further options depending on the option that you select here. So with grid, it gives you of the grid, a full frame, a full second, a quarter frame. If our grid was timecode based versus bars and beats, this menu will change. Which brings me to stuff I'm not going to cover in great detail now, but you've got your quantization menu here, if you're quantizing music automatically. And you also have an audio alignment panel. Now this panel is quite clever. If you have a target clip, so say a vocal line, and you've got a backing vocal line, you give it a reference and a target, and it kind of matches it to be in time. You can use this for ADR, but we'll get back to this when we get to more advanced post-production video features. I'm just explaining the interface for now. And that's pretty much your toolbar at the top here. As I said, there's a lot of other buttons that you can still enable, but these are the default ones. And luckily in this version, this color menu used to not be there by default, so I always had to switch it on, but now it is, which makes me happy. If it's not, please make sure that you can that you turn on your color menu, because we can't just have everything be dull and gray. Next up, we have the transport menu, or the transport bar.